Hi everyone, today I'm sharing with you my entire process for making a card, and here you see me using my stamping pad to stamp the image of the flower with antique linen, a distress ink for no line coloring, watercolor coloring. A lot of people have the Misty stamping tool. I just had this one, so it just works fine, and I think whichever tool works best for you, and depending on what kind of budget you have, then purchase whichever stamping tool works for you. You could also do this with acrylic stamping blocks. You don't have to have something with a hinge on. So once I had the stamped image, I'm just using my watercolors. Interesting story about these. These are from my school days. So these are the same watercolors that I used when I was in 6th grade. And I actually haven't done watercolors since 8th grade, but I did carry these from India to Iowa when I went to grad school there, and then from Iowa to California, and they've just been sitting in my closet. And when we moved to our rental while our house is getting remodeled, and I'm hoping I'll get a studio once the remodel is done, I decided to bring these. I found these when we were moving, packing and moving, and I decided to bring them over to the rental thinking I'll use them, and I did. So I just wanted to share that little story with you about how old these, we used to call them poster colors. They're camel poster colors, and they're basically watercolors. They're completely dry right now, so cakey and cracky, but just putting some water in, I was able to reactivate the pigment, and it was really fun to paint these. So I just did a basic layer, a basic red layer, crimson layer first, and then I just went in with my white to make it a bit lighter because I felt like I had put too much paint and not enough water, and I wanted it to have that watercolor feel. So my thing with watercolors is that I tend to go very heavy-handed in using my pigment, and I don't use as much water, and it turns out looking like an acrylic painting, not as much as a very clean watercolor painting. But I just, figured that's my style. That's how I like to do it. I like intense colors. I like bold colors. And so that's what I do. And my attempt here to make it lighter didn't really work because I started out doing it the way I normally do it. And then I thought maybe I should give it more of a watercolor feel. And I tried to add some white. But at one point I was just like, you know what, I'll just do my thing. I don't have to be like somebody else. I don't have to do a certain style of doing it. I'll just paint with my heart and it'll turn out good, whatever it is. I didn't have any expectations of how it would turn out. Honestly, it was just an experiment given how old these paints are. I just wanted to see if that would work, and I think it did. So once I had done the 3 flowers, I went on to the buds, used the same colors, exactly the same colors, exactly the same style, no point changing it halfway into it. And I'm using water brushes. So these are brushes that you can fill with water. And it's just convenient because then you don't have to, for me it's convenient because I tend to accidentally spill a lot of stuff. I've also been known to drink water from a cup that was meant for painting. So I am not very aware of my surroundings when I get into my zone with painting. And so for me, these water brushes are really, really good because the water's already in them. And all I have to do is dab out excess water on a rag, which I always have on my side, or just with changing colors, it's easy too. And I don't have to keep changing the color in the cup because when you start dipping your paintbrush into a water cup, the color of the water changes depending on the paints you're using. And to be able to have no mixing ins between colors, you have to keep changing the water. You have to keep getting fresh water. And who has time for that? I don't. Also, it spills. So I use these water brushes extensively in almost all of my, no matter what kind of watercoloring I'm doing. So for the leaves, I just went in and I cleaned the red paint off of the tip of my water brush on a rag. And then I just started with my yellow base layer and then added my greens. And I used 2 greens that you can see here in this video, the darker and the lighter green. And I'm kind of just going by instinct here, not really doing any fine work, any fine details in this layer. It's just adding splotches of color. So there's an underlayer and there's another layer on top with some light and some dark colors. Pretty much that's it. And there will be another layer after this. So this is kind of when it starts coming to life and you see how it's all shaping up, and you kind of get a feel for the painting. And I really do feel like my work talks to me and tells me what it needs next. I don't know if it's something weird or it's a quirk or what it is, but I just, once I've done the base layer, I just know what I need to do to either intensify it or to make it more of a mellow looking painting. In this case, I was going for bold colors. That's how I set my intent when I started this painting. And so when I went in for the final layers, this time I am using a very, very thin brush. This is probably a 0 by 10, which is one of the thinnest brushes I have. And I'm just using that. So I did get a water cup to do this bit because I do not have a water brush that has a fine tip like this. And these aren't expensive brushes that I use. This one's just from Craft Smart. I think I might have gotten it at Michael's. It comes in a set of 3 or 4. I don't think that you need to have the horse sable brushes. I remember my art teacher in school used to insist that we all use horse sable brushes, and it was horrifying to me at that age to learn that horses' tails and horses' hairs are used to make brushes. Ew, who wants to use that? But I do understand. I mean, when you've painted with a horse sable brush, it's the strands, the amount of water they hold, the amount of pigment they hold. It's just so different, and you get a feel for that kind of stuff that you can't go back to the cheap stuff. Thankfully, I had 30 years in between my watercoloring, so I have been easily able to transition to a relatively moderately priced brush without any issues. And watercolor paper really is what is most important. And if you haven't seen Dawn Woldsagel from W9 talk about her watercoloring, or you haven't seen Lydia Fiedler, who's another leading watercolorist, at least a person that I admire and follow quite a bit, both of them say your paper is what's most important. And I agree, investing in your paper is really what is something that you really need to think about. And it doesn't come cheap, especially the Arches brand, which is the one that I use, both hot press and cold press. Your colors react differently. The way the water moves is different. I try not to use a heat gun when I'm doing this kind of watercolor painting. This is on cold press paper. It's only because I like how the paint moves naturally and how much I don't use too much water. It's not a watercolor wash, as you can see. It's pretty intense color. And I do want it to spread by itself to get the effect that I want. So now you see me going in with a Derwent Inktense white pencil, just adding some more highlights because I felt some areas were too dark. I had added too much pigment to begin with my watercolors. So I just wanted to lighten that up. But watercolor paper is really important. So do your research on your watercolor paper and invest in that. You will not regret it. Paints, I have used a wide variety of them. I don't really care either way. There's, of course, the super expensive Daniel Smith watercolors that people swear by. I haven't tried those, so I can't say how they're different. I'm sure that they are awesome, but for me, like, these poster paints are decades old and they work just fine. They produce good results, and I'm not doing fine art. I'm just making cards to send to people. It's the thought that matters and the sentiment that matters. I guess. So once I had that painted completely, I die cut it. It does come with a matching die. This is set from Altenew. And once I had die cut it, then I knew exactly what I needed to do. The card kind of started coming together in my head. And I just went ahead. I love dots. So I just went ahead and I did some highlights with my white pen. And I love these white pens from Sakura. They are just, the ink flows beautifully through these. And then I did some glitter circles in the middle, again, to add some interest, and added some more dots. I did use a glaze pen and a glitter pen for those to give it some more texture and dimension. And then the leaves kind of looked there after I had done the flowers, so I just added a bit of glitter on that. Did a splatter on my base cardstock, and then I started playing around with different frame ideas. And once I figured out I wanted to do a double matting, I die cut one of the front card panels with a wonky rectangle stitch die from MFT Stamps that you see me putting the score tape on right now. And the base cardstock is 110 pound cardstock from Brutus Monroe, I believe. And then I just did another frame die cut to frame these flowers in red. This particular scallop edge frame is also from MFT Stamps. And I just love mixing up, the different brands, because sometimes that's what you got to do to make a card work for you. So, I love all of the brands that I use. I love the products that they make. So I happily vouch for them. So for the flower itself that I had painted, I wanted it to have some dimension and really be the focus of the card. So I went ahead and I cut a lot of foam tape. I usually don't do that, but this just, it needed that because it's so plain. Otherwise there's nothing else, and really the flower is the centerpiece, and I really wanted to show it off, especially since I had spent so much time painting it. So I did spend the time to cut little tiny pieces of foam tape that would go into those nooks and crannies, those little buds, and I really think that that achieved the effect I wanted. And just a very simple sentiment that I stamped on and cut into a banner shape and stuck on there. And that's how it, it comes together really quickly once you start with a painting. It really does come together very quickly after. So there's really not that much to it, but I just wanted to show you the whole process of how from start to finish you stamp an image, you color it, you cut it out, and then you stick it onto a card to make the final piece.